Hey everybody, we are now live. I appreciate, Sofia just disappeared, but I'm sure she'll be right back. I appreciate the three, soon to be four of you joining us. We'll add Sofia back in momentarily. It's actually hard to believe this is session number 50 something of our spring virtual conference. So if you've been watching since the beginning, good work. My eyes have been attached to the screen for nearly the past 72 hours. And I hope you've enjoyed all the wisdom of all the fantastic speakers that we've had before you for the past couple days. Today's final conversation is on creating the best team possible. This is an extremely important issue relevant to everyone listening, whether you're in a brewery or any other kind of business. It's relevant to being a better person, and it's relevant to just, creating that culture you want to spend time around and have people who want to be part of. We're living in weird times, and in many parts of the country, it's challenging to even find staff in general. Today, we're going to talk about hiring practices to create diverse, inclusive, and equitable workplaces, strategies to make this happen, the training necessary to maintain a productive and successful team, and overall, how creating this positive company culture can help you be a better brewery. While there is no way possible to provide the complete recipe for creating the best team in just an hour, I hope the unique insight of our panelists can provide you inspiration and ideas that you can put into your own business. And Sofia, welcome back to the conversation. But Max, because you are to the right of me, it's time for intros, and you're up first.
Thanks, Andrew. Happy to be here today. Really happy to talk about this topic with everyone. My name is Max Finnance. I am the Education and Training Manager for Artisanal Brewing Ventures. So that's 6 Point Brewery, Victory Brewing Company, and Southern Tier Brewing Company, as well as Bold Rock Cider and Seltzer down south. My passion in this arena obviously lies within the training and beer education and sort of liquid education for your staff, but I'm also really excited and passionate about the opportunities to expand diversity, equity, inclusion, and all of that. So I'm excited to see what we can talk about today.
And Max, I'm excited to see you face to face. I know we've corresponded randomly over the past couple of years, so it's nice to see you more than just a little Facebook, avatar there. And I really appreciate all you do for education in the industry. I know you're really passionate about it, and I am too, and I absolutely love that.
Thank you, Andrew.
And Nick, you're up. You just opened a brewery fairly recently, is that correct?
Yeah, so I'm Nick. We just opened, officially opened to the public 4 weeks ago, but we've been, kind of building out and getting ready to open since early January. So we actually had like a very short opening ramp up. This topic is very near and dear to my heart, and one of the founding principles of the company we founded. Just to give you a little bit of my background, I worked at Trillium Brewing Company, helped them open originally back in 2011, 2012, and worked full-time there. And then, moved on, worked in the cannabis industry for a brief period, and then decided to open up my own brewery. And that's where I'm sitting in right now, in this lovely office.
Well, huge congratulations to you.
Thanks so much.
And Kelly, I always enjoy the conversations you and I have because you're so passionate. And that's the one characteristic I think I like about you more than anything, whether we're talking about what we're talking about today, building that right team, or talking about building a disability-friendly tap room, which you will be giving a presentation on very, very soon. You're so knowledgeable, but it's truly your energy and your heart which truly stands out. But for everybody else who doesn't know you, tell them a little bit more about what you do in the industry.
So we took a very interesting way into the world of beer in the fact that we are a family. Fundamentally, we're a family with two boys on the autism spectrum. Two boys, now grown men, right? So they're 25 and Noah's about to be 30. And the employment rates, I'm just going to kind of cut right in there to what we're talking about today, is the employment rates for people with disabilities are wretched. They're horrible. They are next to non-existent. So we knew really early on that we would have to create opportunity for our sons. And then Tom later laid on me that he would like to actually have a brewery. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? And so I was a special education advocate and all other kinds of things, mentors, going in and doing trainings and presentations on inclusion. So we kind of married all these things into our brewery. And so the deal was between husband and wife was, okay, if we're going to do a brewery, we are going to make it accessible. And we are going to do everything that we can, that we know now, and continue to learn to make it accessible. So our little brewery, even though we're only a little 5-barrel brewery, which you can kind of see over my shoulder, wait, I'm directionally challenged on Zoom. But even though we're a 5-barrel brewery, I think we are the second brewery in the United States of America that actually made our tap room to be disability and mobility and sensory friendly. And that is our goal, and that is our passion, that is our North Star. So that's what I'm going to be bringing to the table in this conversation today.
I love it, and I can't wait to visit your tap room before too long, because Pennsylvania is not too far from me here in Virginia.
That's right.
And Sophia, you're up. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is such an awesome group of people. I'm really honored and excited to be chatting with you guys for the next hour. So I've been in the beer industry for about 8 years professionally now, in a variety of capacities. I started off home brewing in Brazil, and that's where I got my education in beer. I got a degree in brewing science down there, and I moved back to America to get like good professional experience, since the industry there was very nascent at the time. It's grown a lot in the years since then. And I've worked at a few breweries, from small to bigger, and in pretty much every role, from assistant brewer to production manager to general manager to brand director. And I am also on the board of the New York State Brewers Association. I'm an at-large board member, and I also chair the inclusivity committee that we started there last year. And we've just been doing good work trying to make New York beer more accessible and inclusive to everybody.
And great things are going on in New York beer. So you're doing a great job behind the scenes and in front of the camera too.
Thanks.
Now, when we talk, working at a brewery, it's not just in the brew house. It's not just in the tap room. There's so many different positions we could talk about today. And I want to begin with a more general approach. Essentially, when you are hiring someone to join your team, no matter what their position is with the company, what are the top 1, 2, or 3, depending on how many you want to throw away, traits you're looking for in a person to join your team?
I'll start.
You're it.
Number one is passion. If I need to be able to see that someone's passionate about something, whether it's, I honestly, maybe I'll regret saying this, but even if they're not passionate about craft beer, if they're passionate about board games, and they come to the interview and they talk about board games for 15 minutes, that right there says to me, this is a passionate person, and this is like a passion that I can tap into, right? Because I can make anybody passionate about craft beer through my passion and sharing that passion and the things that I care about in craft beer, and bring them down the path of caring, So that's for me, that's the number one thing. If anything else just goes away, it's if you're passionate, then I can use that. I know I can leverage that and help that person learn about craft beer, whatever it is that we actually need for the role. You have to have passion.
And Nick, I don't think you'll regret that at all, because when I talk to brewery owners, if you get someone who's passionate, so many times it means they're trainable. And I know we're going to get into that shortly, but if you get someone who's passionate about your brand, they're going to be willing to learn. So I absolutely love that recommendation there.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly the same thing I was going to say for my number one. Nick stole my glory there, but I guess I would prefer they're passionate about craft beer and not just something.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter if you know nothing about beer. If you are really interested in it and intrigued by it, and I can see that passion, I can teach you anything you need to know about beer. I'm sure any good brewer can teach you how to brew beer. We can teach you how to be a good server or a bartender in the tap room, but you can't teach someone how to be excited about it and how to communicate that passion to customers. That's a lot harder to do.
And Kelly, how about you?
Mine is showing up, right? So my first thing, because I'm going to have individuals who might not be able to show their passion the way that maybe others would show theirs. So I'm going to see how brave they were in showing up. Because anytime you're showing up to a new opportunity and you're kind of feeling insecure, did you want me to put my headphones on? I kind of am getting I can't. Hold on one second. Hold on. Let's see if this works better.
I can jump in.
Yeah, go for it, Sofia. Kelly, your audio is a little bit distant. I'm going to let Sofia jump in right now. Sofia, if you want to hop back on the mic. And Kelly, when you figure out your mic, we'll get you back in.
Yeah, I think on a now I'm echoing too. I think on a related note, I look for curiosity. You know, I think that it's really important to ask a lot of questions when you're at an interview. And I think a little bit more specifically, like about the future, about what you want to achieve in a role and what kind of growth that you want to have. And I think that really shows that you have some kind of long-term commitment to the company. And like, I don't need you to work for me for 5 years for it to be like a valuable experience, but that mindset of long-term commitment I think is really valuable. And I've had really good experiences with employees that I've hired that just ask a ton of questions like, what are the next steps for the brewery? What are you guys planning on doing? What can this role grow into? And those kinds of questions, it just kind of makes me feel like you're somebody that I'm going to be able to rely on in our time together.
And I think that goes hand in hand with what Kelly was talking about with dependability. And Kelly, I'll throw the mic back to you if you want to add on to what you were saying.
Can you hear me? All right. It is showing up. And I was going to also add the curiosity factor. So I recognize anybody showing up to an interview is going to be on pins and needles, right? Especially if you haven't had exposure to the business before. And some of our jobs here, you don't necessarily need exposure to the business before. But I am going to really buy into the curiosity factor, right? And I am going to look, somebody might not be able to ask me those specific questions for a variety of reasons, right? So whether it's just, you kind of freeze under pressure. So I try to be like really creative in the interview process, that it's not just to sit down and talk. I'm going, like I saw somebody come in, first of all, one of our beer tenders, who I love, has been with us from day one. He was one of the people who showed up when I put a call out just to like carry all the kegs down into the basement because we were opening up. I'm like, they're on the floor. We have to get them down in the basement. Who from the community can help us? And he showed up, right? So right there is really, that's put one in the column for him for showing up, right? Like, he's not getting paid. He's not doing anything. Like, he just showed up. We don't know each other at all. So that was really impressive to me. But then when he came in actually to interview for the beer tender job, in other scenarios, I kind of laughed because I'm like, oh boy. Let me just say that he kind of came in dressed like Freddie Mercury. All right. So I was like, that's an interesting first impression for a job that you're trying to get. But we were talking, and I realized really soon that talking was not working, right? Like, I knew he probably had more in him. So I was like, you know, I really need to like kind of get some things right. So I need to do some work downstairs in the basement. And would you like to come with me? And we can continue chatting about this while we do this. And as we were down there, I said, hey, could you hand that? And I was just giving him like the tri-clamp on that roller cart over there. He's like, what's the tri-clamp? Great. Now I know he's going to ask me questions if he doesn't know something, right? So that is a huge part for an employee. So I described it, and when I described it, he could hand it to me. And then he really got interested in what we were doing. He started opening up more. We started discussing what I was doing, why we were doing it. And then I'm like, this is it. Like he's going, and all he came in to interview for was a beer tender position. But right there in that little bubble was all I needed to know about him. I'm like, he showed up, he was early, he asked questions, he could follow directions, he could interact with me, and I'm like, he is definitely 100% worth giving a try in this position. But it was a very different way than most people interview people for their positions. And that's one thing our brewery wants to do is to be able to do that, is because my son could never go and interview for a position, like just never. Like he's dyspraxic, and dyspraxia is like when your brain doesn't communicate well with all your muscles. So basically, every muscle movement you have to learn how to do, rather than it just kind of coming naturally through Mother Nature. So his speech is still very stymied. He'd never be able to do a traditional interview. So that opens us up to be more open to how are there other ways that you can express yourself to us, and how can we be receptive as to looking differently at your abilities and seeing where we can actually fit you in our brewery. Because I just want to share this one thing, because I think this is really important. This is what our brewery is about. And I don't have it memorized, so I'm going to have to read it. Inclusion.
Kelly, your audio is a little bit chunky right now. It's a little in and out. If you could maybe just talk into the mic. I think your hands might be blocking it.
Stop moving my hand.
I did the same.
Inclusion is not a strategy to help people fit into the systems and structures which exist in our societies. It is about transforming those systems and structures to make it better for everyone. So I think there's too often that we have it upside down, right? It's like, where can we plug you in versus here you are, how can we plug you in? Right? So
Kelly, it's hard to hear at the moment. We might want to kind of get your mic fixed. I'm not sure what the issue is, but the story that you shared was fantastic, and that quote is super powerful. What I want to dive into now is, obviously we want to find employees that fit in just like that. That's the absolute goal. And some of the traits that you and Sofia just mentioned about dependability and looking for someone who has that long-term commitment, they're obviously ideal. And in a past life, I ran a food service. I would run really large-scale concession operations at all kinds of crazy events, whether it's a football game, monster truck show, or hockey. I was all over the place. But when I was running these events, if I needed, let's say, 50 people, I might have to hire 100 people. And if I got 50 people, out of those 50 people, only 10 might be, fitting in the job description that I actually needed. It's challenging to find hardworking people, just like both of you have mentioned. So what I want to ask everybody today is, how are you finding those people? Are you using sites like social media, Facebook, Instagram? Are you using Indeed, Craigslist? Before we get into more of the questions you might ask at an interview, where are you even going to find candidates for positions at your brewery?
So having just done this, I can speak to it a little bit. For us, it was a couple different pathways. All the traditional stuff, posting on Indeed. You get the most volume of resumes I've found from Indeed. Whether or not those are like quality candidates, that's another story. But I think like tapping into your local community, and hopefully if you're starting a brewery in an area, you're already like tapped in, like what people are looking for, and then talking to those people about what you're doing and getting people interested in what you're doing. Because if you're starting a business and you're attracting talent just by telling your story, that's a good sign, because then you're also going to attract customers based on that story, right? So for us, it was a lot of like, all right, we're going to post to Indeed, we're going to post to our website, but we're also going to post on our social media, on our Instagram and our Facebook page, because that's how people know about us even before open. we told all of our friends, and they followed the Instagram page, and they got their friends to follow the Instagram page, or somebody came across it because we used like, the hashtag craft beer, whatever it was. People have discovered the brand, and they're going to start talking about it. And then when you post a job, it says to those, the people who are already watching you, oh, I'm going to tag my friend on this post because they would be great to, go work in the tap room, or, they've been working at XYZ place and they want, a change or whatever it is. And then I think, the last piece of that is, using your network, talking to the people that and just getting the word out there. It's really tough right now, especially up here, because we talked a little bit about before we went live, like how things are starting to open up a little bit more, restrictions are starting to relax. And up here, basically every restaurant, bar, everything is like hiring everyone right now, and there's just nobody left. So we're kind of like, we've got a couple people, but it's maybe not ideal, but we'll adjust the schedule accordingly. So it's a big challenge, and then there's using other pathways as well. So we're my wife and my partner Zach's wife. They're actually the owners of the business, and we don't really talk about that ever. But they're both members of Pink Boots, and we posted on Pink Boots. That was the first place we posted, even before Indeed. And we posted on Beer Culture to see if we could attract other people from different groups that maybe aren't paying attention to what we're doing. With mixed success, but for us, in the startup phase, like the most successful thing was working with our I don't want to say social network because that means like something else, but it's really like people know who we are and that we're starting a brewery, and they hear the story, and hopefully it like compels them to come in. And that was our approach to like finding people, at least in this opening phase. And now it's more about like becoming embedded in the community in different ways that are hopefully meaningful, to get exposure to those different groups. Whatever.
I believe the storytelling aspect, both in hiring that initial staff, but maintaining it as you grow, is extremely important. Max, I think you had unmuted, so you're up next.
Yeah, I was just sort of something that dovetails into what Nick was just saying. I always like to draw this analogy. Sensory, and sensory science and sensory panels are one of my passions. And one of my responsibilities at 6 Point was building out a real sensory panel. And when you're building out a sensory panel, you have to look beyond the brewing team, because the best palate in your entire company might be the IT guy. It might be the HR guy. It might be the woman who does operations. And if you don't offer that training to everyone on your team, if you don't offer them that exposure and say, come on in and let's do some off flavors training together, and let's see if you're any good at this, and let's see if you're excited by it, then you might have the best palate in your company totally going to waste in the operations team. So by the same token, I think if you want to put together the best overall team you can, you have to go outside of your comfort zone. You have to look outside of the spaces you might be looking in, and I love using social media to, attract job candidates. And I love, Indeed and all the classic routes, but I think we have to try and like look outside of that as well and go meet people where they are and say, hey, you might be an atypical candidate for this beer industry job, but is this something you would ever consider being interested in? Because that person might be the best diacetyl taster you've ever met, and they just don't know what diacetyl is yet. And so, Nick mentioned beer culture. I think that's a fantastic board in terms of, reaching out to underserved and underrepresented communities. Pink Boots, of course. But I'm still brainstorming on better options. This is something we talk about a lot, but where can we go even beyond those options to try and find people that have said, I like the idea of working in craft beer, but I've never thought about how I could get from just being a regular casual fan to working in the industry.
Yeah, I think
Max, go ahead, Nick.
I was going to say, like, kind of related to that, and probably what we're going to talk about later is, creating an environment where those groups of people are more likely to interact with you, right? And that's like really like how you present yourself to the public and what you do in your public-facing spaces. And I don't want to like derail this conversation. We can talk more about that and like all my thoughts around that. But that's I think that's one of the pathways towards that is creating like a really inclusive and open and inviting space.
Absolutely. And Letitia Cook with Beer Culture was supposed to join us today, but she actually had a last minute emergency. It wasn't unable. But I wanted to read something from their mission statement. In the Beer Culture messaging, they say their goal is to invite new drinkers to the party. And it's all about reaching Black, African Americans, and BIPOC within our communities through humanitarian assistance, educational programs, and compassionate community services in an effort to support them where they are. Doing so builds organic and authentic trust within the community, which is the fabric of how we can build a sustainable future, not only for the craft beverage industry, but for the world at large. And I love what beer culture is doing, and reaching outside of our norms is very important if we want to create that.
Yeah, in terms of places that that we've found success, that I've found success in my different roles, it kind of depends. Since I was GM at Industrial Arts, I was hiring for every facet of the business, and it kind of depended on the role where we would find the candidates. So social media we found that was really good for like sales positions, because it was people that were already passionate about the brand. Indeed was good for like administrative positions. Craigslist was actually really good for like warehousing and maintenance positions. And bartenders, mostly like it was people that we met over the bar. Like, you know, it was people who were local necessarily, and, or I guess not necessarily, but they already knew the product and they supported the product. So for me, I kind of adjusted the strategy based on that. Social media, you would definitely look.
While you're talking about hiring people from across the bar, because obviously anyone in your tap room is already a fan, most likely, of what you have created. Do you ever feel like that's hiring too close to home, as in maybe hiring that super regular who's just overly excited about your brand, and then putting them behind the bar might be not the best fit? Have you ever had any situations encountered like that?
Yes. And it's like, it's really hard to have a super fan who sees like, oh, I saw you posted on social media that you're hiring a bartender. I'd love to apply. It's such a delicate situation to be like, oh, that you're not the right fit. I'm so sorry. And I wish I had a good way to work around that. But honestly, it's awkward every single time.
I had a conversation the other day, and I can't remember if it was live or just a private Zoom meeting. They all blur together these days, unfortunately. But I was talking to Jamar Valentine of Noda Brewing. He runs their tap room there. And he was talking about a similar situation when he says if he gets that candidate who's just too attached to the brand already, he doesn't necessarily make the interview harder, but he really drills into the hard work that it's going to be and asks a lot of tough questions. And maybe at the end of the interview, it's not that they wouldn't be a good fit. Maybe they don't want the position as much as they once did. They would prefer to keep drinking on the other side of the bar.
That's a really good approach. Yeah.
It's the little things.
Yeah.
And Kelly, how about yourself? I know you've talked a little bit about before, but I'd love to hear some of the current strategies.
Right. So we do often have families who might have a person in their family who happens to have a disability, and they will want their person to be here at the brewery because we're disability friendly. And I 100% get it, right? But just because we're disability friendly doesn't mean that that person wants to work here, right? Or that it's a good fit. Because sometimes there isn't. And I actually had a grandmom who was asking on behalf of her grandson who frequents here. And the first question I asked her was, I said, does he want to work here? Because he's like Mr. like cruise ship social director when he's here on the other side of the bar. And so I just started asking some questions, you know, just to feel it out. And I said, I'm just really honest. I'm like, well, I don't think that that's going to be a fit because these are the dynamics that are going on behind the bar. I said, and I think it would be very frustrating for him. And then it would lose, like, this is his space to be him and who he is. And to be on the other side of the bar pulls him out of who he is. And he has since got another job at another place that he absolutely loves. And for him, For our place, he's an incredible artist. So we ping him to do a couple of our labels. And one of the things that I want to share is with one of the labels is that I commissioned him to do a label, and he did a great job. The first time the label comes back, I said that was a little artistic license, that because I gave him kind of like directions on what we would need it, and he took some artistic license, and I told him to do it again. Because you know what? I would do that with any other artist, right? So it didn't come in, and I asked him just to repeat it. He repeated it. I paid him. And then I took notice that he wasn't depositing the check. And I said, next time he came in, I said, "Did you deposit that check yet?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because I feel bad." And I said, "Why do you feel bad about depositing the check?" And here it comes, folks. Because when I was taught in school to go out and work, I never got paid for it. I had to volunteer my time. And that is what he learned. And I told him to unlearn it. I asked him to make a label, and he did the work, and he gets paid for his work. Period, end of story. If he didn't deposit that check, I was never going to ask him to do another label again. So, and he said, "Oh, okay." And he deposited the money the next day. But the big lesson here for all of us as business people is don't expect people with disabilities to do the work for free just because they have a disability. And don't pay them nominal pay because they have a disability. You pay them for the work they're doing. And one time I had a friend ask, he goes, "Well, my daughter can only fill salt and pepper shakers. Should she be paid minimum wage to fill salt and pepper shakers?" I said, "Let me ask you this question. Does anybody else have the time to fill those salt and pepper shakers?" I said, if she's doing a job that helps that business, the answer is yes. That's what she gets paid. Period, end of story. Because it's only volunteering for a job if you actually raise your hand and say, "Hey, I want to volunteer to do the job." But too often with people with disabilities, they're plugged into these roles of quote unquote volunteering to gain experience. And I'm like, listen, everybody else who works gains experience and gets paid. And that's what we need to change in the world of our disability and our hiring for people with disabilities.
Absolutely. And Max, I'll let you go. I'm sure you're going to touch on what I'm going to throw out there.
Yeah, and Kelly, that's a fantastic point. I would take it one step further. And I honestly think this is an industry-wide problem that we have that doesn't just apply to people with disabilities. But I think it's sort of one of the dirty little secrets of craft beer is that people are encouraged and sometimes even required to step in and take a volunteer basis position, washing kegs or moving kegs around the tap room or doing some other sort of menial labor to get their foot in the door. And I always really encourage people to say, look, I really value the opportunity to work for your brewery, but I can't take an unpaid position. If I'm going to be coming in, I need to be paid for my time. Not necessarily because they actually need to be paid for their time, but because, the more that we perpetuate these unpaid internships and stuff like that, the more that we select for types of people that can afford to take an unpaid position. And we're going to continue to perpetuate the types of, exclusivity in craft beer culture that we've always been getting if we don't make these internships accessible to people that can't take an unpaid position because they have obligations. So I think as an industry, we need to do really a lot better at paying everyone what they're worth for their time.
Max, you're absolutely nailing it with that one. And Nick, I'm sure you're gonna have something to follow up about real quick. I want to talk about how we can reduce these barriers, which kind of goes right in hand with what Max is talking about. So Nick, I'll throw the mic to you.
Yeah, 100% what Max said. That's how I got into the industry, was that I had the ability to be an unpaid worker, the ability and the desire, frankly, to be an unpaid worker, and that's how I got my professional experience, 100%. And, I think, again, as a business owner, and part of the founding principles of our brewery was that, we are confident that going back to what I said earlier and mirroring what some of the other panelists said earlier, if someone has passion and they're willing to work, I can teach them anything, like anything, to what I would expect from them for that job. And going to the question at hand, Andrew, how do we like hire better, or how do we make sure that we're getting the right people? I think it comes down to like setting up systems so that so any implicit bias that you might have that you might not be aware of just is gone. Like it's impossible for it to enter into the process. And so, the way we've defined the process here at Belleflower, and the way we had defined the process at Trillium, and the way I defined the process at my previous career in the cannabis industry is by setting up structure around interviewing, right? So it's everybody for whatever position gets the same 5 questions. They're in a specific format, and you tell the person that you're interviewing what the format is ahead of time, so they have the chance to prepare.
Wait, Nick, I have to stop you for a second. You're talking about a craft brewery having systems for hiring, not some Outback Steakhouse Ruby Tuesdays Applebee's restaurant right now?
Yes. and even one like our size, like there's literally 5 of us that work here every day, and it's really not that hard to like set up those systems. If you're following like good hiring practices, you're already doing it, right? Theoretically. So what we did at Trillium, what I brought here and to my other job was that system. So it's, when you're setting up interview questions, looking at something like the STAR format, that's what we chose. And STAR stands for, situation or task, the action you took, and the result. And so I always say at the beginning of an interview, say, all right, these are I have 5 questions that I'm going to ask you. We ask everybody the same questions. And, usually we do interviews in like a panel style. And everybody in the panel has the same sheet, the same question sheet. And, you say to the person interviewing, like think of your answer as a story, right? You're telling me like what happened, what you did, and what the result was. And that's kind of like how I want you to think about, the answers to these questions. And, usually they're not skill-based questions just because, like I said, I want to get people specifically in the door that I can train and like give them best practices. Not saying I wouldn't hire someone skilled, but, that's kind of like where my mind is. And so you go through those questions as a panel, and then everybody scores every question, 1 to 5 individually before we discuss as a group. And then you come together and you say, okay, well, what was your score for question 1? And that way, again, it takes out everybody's like group bias, because once you start talking about answers, if you're an influential person that is able to like sell your ideas to the rest of the group, then suddenly the rest of the group is believing everything you're saying, except like their own personal beliefs, right? So if you think about it that way, and you think about it as like a process and a system that you need to like approach like not the issue, but like solving that problem of hiring and like finding the right person, then I think it takes away a lot of the possibility for bias in any situation. If you think about like, this is the type of person we want someone passionate, we want somebody that cares about XYZ and is going to show up to work and be engaged the whole time. Like tailor your questions towards those types of things, because that's what you care about. And then ultimately, whether you're talking to somebody on the phone or whether they're there in person in a panel, you come to the result of like who that person is, as an individual, not as like however they present themselves. That's just like my take on it.
And removing bias, that's a great point to add on there. I really respect you for working to do that as much as you can. And Sofia?
Yeah, I think kind of related to what you're saying, it reminds me of what Max said about like taking cues from sensory panels. Like the whole point of that is removing as much bias as possible, right? Like I've been on so many sensory panels where the head brewer is like, well, I taste mint in this, and everybody's like, yeah, I totally get mint in that. And like, you didn't get mint in that. But like, there is that, like, a person of authority will influence everybody else. I don't know if you can hear the ice cream truck outside my window. So the person, like, people will defer to certain voices of authority. And I think having a set of questions is really important. What I like to do to kind of mitigate that a little bit is have the person interview with two different people separately. So rather than have it be a panel where because like even if the person isn't saying something, you kind of get like, you can read body language and stuff like that. So I like to have a manager and a coworker, like someone who would be at the same level of the person, interview the same candidate separately, and then share impressions of that same set of questions. I do think that it's really important to have the same questions so that you can kind of like compare the two effectively. I also kind of related to what Kelly was saying earlier. I think it's important to have some kind of measure that is beyond a talking interview, because I do think that, people get nervous and don't exactly present their best selves, and some kind of like task or activity I've found to be really helpful, even if you're just kind of talking through the activity. Like, I remember asking like, how would you move this keg from here to over there? And kind of like have them talk through the process. Or, you're alone in the warehouse and a delivery truck comes to drop off some pallets. Nobody else is around. How do you handle that? Those kinds of like questions I've found to be really helpful for like, what's your thought process and how do you problem solve in a situation?
Great insight there, Sophia. And I want to kind of transition this to the next part of the conversation. We've talked a little about where you're hiring, actually hiring. Let's pretend we've somehow created a diverse team of really great people who fit all the criteria that you want. We have these people here. We want to talk about keeping them long term. But first, we got to get them trained. So often in the craft beer industry, you hire someone who worked at another brewery. Oh, of course they know how to work in a brewery, but it's not that simple. Every business is different in their own unique ways. At the four of your establishments and in your experiences, what type of initial training do you recommend when someone's first brought on to a business to make sure they understand exactly what you stand for, but also the skills needed to accomplish what they're hired for?
They need to know the culture of your business, like first. And I was even going to put that in the hiring part of it. Before we even sit for the interview, we take them on a tour of our space to let them know not just what we do, but why we do it. Like, what is the basis of our whole business model? So that is just like driving home the point that for our own is that we are not just a brewery. We're asking our people to sign on for more than just being a beer tender. We're asking them to sign on to be a community member, to level up and like come out and do the community events that we do. We are asking them to make all our community members comfortable in the space. And we lead with that, because that will actually, just naturally migrate, people to you, and naturally migrate people away from you, for the work environment. Then we get down to the nuts and bolts, but we always lead with our mission statement of the purpose that we are here. And I think that has to be the founding principle. And also, like, I've had to call people in and have one-on-one meetings with them, because sometimes people think that people with disabilities are here and they're here, and it's like, no, we're like this. And how I bring that to the forefront with some of our other, not just the people who work here, but also some of our customers, is to say, I just start listing all the things I do for them that are accommodations and modifications, because I know who they are as a person and what we do to make them feel comfortable in the space while they're with us. And I said, because that's really it. We all are on the human spectrum, and
to me, that's just the natural way of being, right? We're going to try to treat each other with extra TLC. If we know that somebody likes to sit at a particular space, we're going to try to make that space available for them when we know that they come, right? It's just another little way that we can show that we care about somebody. And I always tell my boys that. I'm like, the way that you can show somebody that you care about them is that you thought about them before you even interacted with them, right? And you're just gonna do it an extra measure of, little extra measure of love that you're sending that way. So like for my boys, that extra measure of love might be writing them a list of knowing what they're going to do when they come into the brewery, right? So basically it's just a task list. First, you're going to do this, then you're going to do this, then you're going to do this. And that's an extra little level of love for them because now they know what to expect. They know what is expected of them. And better yet, they know when they're done and they can go home, right? So those are just some of the really, I consider them just kind of no-brainer ways of showing people that you care about them. And that's the kind of culture that we want to have at our brewery.
Yeah, and I think Kelly just said something that really dovetails into how you can, make anyone successful and give them the tools for success as they come on board with your team. Culture is critically important, and you have to get someone on board with the culture and make sure they understand what the expectations of the culture are, but also within their role, and growing into the role within, whether it's the first 30 days, the first 60 days, the first 90 days within that role. Checklists are great. Coming up with an SOP for how to onboard your team and coming up with some objectives and saying like, all right, within the first 30 days of you being in this role, here's what we expect you to begin to understand. Here are the relationships we expect you to start to forge with your team and with, cross-departmental teams. Within 60 days, we expect you to have these things done and these understandings that are beyond that, and give that all to them, upfront, very early on in their onboarding process, so they have some clear-cut delineations of here's how I'm going to be measured on success, here's what I can do to succeed, and here's how I can grow into this role more quickly and get my feet going and be successful in it.
And Max, while I have you, I want to ask you a question because we've used a lot of terminology today. I've heard onboarding, I've heard mission statements. Nick, you talk about the processes behind like hiring and things like that. Craft brewery owners so often and managers wear so many different hats. How do you find time to focus on these concepts that are extremely important, but not always associated with craft beer?
You make the time. You have to. Like that's just that's it. It's part of the investment, right? Like you can't ignore it because if you do, then it's just gone, and you're not doing it anymore. That's really what it is. And again, like I'll go back to our like founding principles. When we initially talked about starting the company and like opening and who we were going to be, some of the first words out of our mouths were, training is going to be number one, the most important thing. Like again, I keep saying it, but it's like as long as you have passion for something, I know I can make you passionate and help you learn like what we expect and what we're doing here. And backtracking a little bit, going back to like me investing my time when I had the ability to become a professional. I don't think that anybody should really have to do that. Like if you come on board for a job, like you should be trained on how to do it and should be paid for that training as well. And, just like a minor example for us, and we haven't had like a lot of time to be able to do this, but, we've offered to our front of house staff that are interested in working on the production side, like I'll send like a message at the beginning of the week and I'll say, hey, we're running the can line on Tuesday. Does anybody want to come in for a couple extra hours to like see how that flows and get, a handle on that process? And, they've come in now a couple times and it's making that investment and being comfortable with that as like a business owner that, not everybody's going to come in with all the experience that you think you need right away. But as long as you're willing to like take the time and make the investment, you're going to have employees that are engaged, that want to be here, that want to like work really hard for you because they take ownership of those things, That's just my experience.
And Nick, one thing, Max, before we throw the mic to you, we won't have time to take a deep dive into it, but the offer of having employees come in and just learn other jobs at your business is extremely important. So often in brew houses, and I know, Sofia, you and I talked about this the other day, the disconnect between front of house and back of house can get very big sometimes. And it's very important everybody understand that we're here for the same goal. And we need to understand, we don't have to love each other, but we need to understand each other and the importance of what the other person is doing, and take the time to learn what the other person is doing so you can respect them more as people, because we're not just servers. We're not just brewers. You're in this as a business, and there's so many different roles that fall into the umbrella of the company that result in success. And Max, I'll throw it back to you on that.
No, and Andrew, that's exactly the direction I was going to go with that too, is, I think those cross-departmental opportunities are really important for that. I think, and that's one reason that I always open up, any trainings I'm running, whether it be sensory training or a beer 101 training that I'm doing for taproom staff. I'll send out an open invite basically to the whole company, up to and including the CEO, and say, like, look, here's the training we're going to be doing. Here's the objective behind it. Here's what you might learn. Please, feel free to come in and sit down if you got a free hour. If you're a sales team member and you have a free day to spend with the brew team, that's only going to make you a better sales team member. And I think, going back to sort of the title of the panel, like, how do we build the best team possible? You're going to get the best buy-in from your people if the IT guy understands the beer making process and therefore becomes more passionate about it. And no longer does he just want to be an IT guy. He wants to be an IT guy at a beer making company or at a brewery. So the more you can inspire that passion in people that maybe they came in to do logistics, and schedule trucks, and all of a sudden they realize that, like, holy cow, maybe I would rather be an assistant brewer, and then you're left looking for a new logistics person to schedule trucks, but you end up with a really, really well-rounded, intricately faceted team of people that are passionate about it and want to be there. And of course, we haven't talked about Cicerone at all. And obviously, as an advanced Cicerone, I'm pretty passionate about that program for the formal side of education. But that's one thing that I really like about their program, is that it forces you to learn more than just, how to wash a glass to be a good bartender. You have to learn about the history of the styles, and you have to learn about the brewing process and all of these different facets of the industry that make you better at your job.
Fantastic insight. Say what, Nick?
It's giving people the why. Like, why did you put peanut butter in this stout? Because it tastes really good, but it's also, like XYZ.
And Sofia, I would love to hear a little bit of your insight on this. I know you're passionate about training and development, and would love to hear some of the strategies you feel are important at a brewery.
I really like the focus on checklists and clear expectations. I think that's so important. And, like, in my experience as an employee and as a manager, if you don't put in that work up front, it's gonna come back to bite you in the ass later. Like, it just is. You can focus on the brewing system and the materials sourcing and all of that kind of stuff, but if you don't focus on the employees, you're not going to be able to build a successful brewery in the long term. Like, I understand that, like, in the beginning, you just need to get beer out. You've often invested a lot of money, you're strapped for cash, you need to just get the beer out, and you're not focusing on, like, what are my expectations of employees in the first 60, 90, 180 days. But the sooner that you do focus on that, the more smoothly the process is going to be in the long term. And I think, like, it's really cool what Nick was saying, is that, like, even though there are only 5 people involved, he's already putting in those systems, because it's so much easier to develop those systems once you already have that framework in place, instead of trying to implement it after 3 years when you're like, oh shit, why don't we have a hiring system? Like, why don't we have a process? Why don't we have any of these things? And the other thing that I wanted to bring up was, I really like, almost out of battery. I really liked what, I think it was Max that was saying. No, it was Kelly. Sorry, what you said. I think it's been really interesting. What you've been saying is, like, specific to the community that you've been dealing with. Like, you can see all of us, we're all like, yeah, like, it's true for everybody. We all like having checklists. We all like having clear expectations. One thing that I really like about production work is that you have a tangible thing at the end of the day. Like, you made a beer or you packaged 120 cases, and like, it's so satisfying to like have that clear product of your work. And I think for computer work, it's tough, you know. It seems like you always have more emails to answer and more things to do, and it kind of takes out some of the reward. So I think especially for your employees that are more computer based, it's really important to have clear goals and metrics so that they can feel accomplished in their job too.
Sophia, I have a question. So I spend a lot of time in front of the computer. So after I say I respond to every 50 emails, do I get a beer? Is that what you're saying? Do I get some sort of reward?
I support this initiative. Yeah, you deserve
Oh my
it.
God. Well, I'm not going to talk about rewarding myself anymore, but what I do want to transition this conversation to, and we're not going to be able to tackle all the topics we thought about prior to this panel, but I want to talk about motivation and rewarding employees. So for the four of you, there's lots of different ways we can motivate people, whether it's by giving them some low fills of extra beer you have around the warehouse, or, giving them extra educational opportunities like getting certified for Cicerone. What have the four of you found as tools you can use to motivate that have actually worked? I want to kind of make this a lightning round, but I'd love to hear those basic, 1, 2, 3s of what you've used or what you believe would be successful with your teams.
I'll go. So I think number one is providing opportunity. That's the biggest thing is, nobody wants, well, I mean, some people want to be like bartenders or, retail beer employees for their entire lives. They love talking to people. They love pouring beers. They love that. But not everybody wants to do that, and if that's your pathway into the industry as like a, front of house, like bartender person, if you say to that person, like, hey, you have an opportunity to help out on the can line because we need an extra hand and, I'll show you how to run the filler. Like, that's crazy. Like, that's something that, and not only that, but like, we're not asking you to like volunteer. We're going to pay you, your regular rate and we'll show you how to do everything. I think that's a huge motivator for people because ultimately I think a lot of people just want to be a part of something. They want to learn more and they want to grow. And if you can give someone an opportunity to do that, then they're gonna love it and they're gonna want to stick with you. And yeah, that's my biggest one.
No, I love it. Great one.
Ours is we pay well. Let's just start with that. So we pay above the industry norm, and that's before tips, right? So then they have their tips. So most of our hires are for beer tenders. For Noah, who has just taken on the bottling, I actually give him a bonus per the cases he puts out. And for Jonah, I give him a bonus because he has other things that he keeps me organized. He's my organizational guy. So he has other things that he helps me with and reminds me. So I pay him a little extra as my personal assistant. And but the other thing we do with our staff is flexible hours. We give them merch, obviously, when our merchandise comes in. We're just understanding, like super understanding when life stuff comes up because we get it. Life stuff comes up. So we really try to operate as much of a family kind of atmosphere as we can. So if somebody just gets a house, we celebrate that they got a house. If something else happens really great, we celebrate. Matter of fact, like off screen is a big pile of tasty cakes because every birthday we celebrate their birthdays by bringing a big bunch of tasty cakes in, and then they get to walk around and give tasty cakes out to all our customers. So just things like that actually build like a really good vibe around here.
Kelly, I absolutely love that. Max, what about you?
So you asked for three things real quick. I think, free beer has to be on it. Like if you're working at a craft brewery, people need a shift beer or, a case of beer a month, however you want to measure that, and merch as well. Because if you build a team that's proud to work for you, you want them to walk into other tap rooms wearing your t-shirt or your hat or your jacket, whatever the coolest merch you can come up with is for your team. Secondly, I love the idea of an education stipend. maybe it varies by role. Obviously, educational opportunities for brewers cost more than educational opportunities for sales members. So, set it up by role, but encouraging people to do continuing education on your dime. I always like the saying, like, pay people to, or encourage people and train people to be good enough so that they can go work anywhere, and then incentivize them to stay with you. And then thirdly, I would say, set up some sort of metric that you can measure and say, all right, this year we're going out to GABF in the fall, and everyone wants to go out to Denver and pour at GABF and spend time in Denver or CBC, Craft Brewers Conference. Figure out some way to measure and say, whoever does the best performance for the next 6 months is going to CBC. And then next year we'll have the same competition again. Make it a reward for your team rather than just some random pick or, this manager's favorite employee is going to CBC every year.
That's great insight, Max. And one thing that Kelly touched on is that the motivation shouldn't just be for, say, front of house staff. Everyone, no matter what their position is, should be given some sort of metric where they can reach attainable goals. The goals need to be attainable. They can't be something so unrealistic that you'll never get rewarded for. You need to make sure you're giving people goals to reach in these checklists that actually get them to a point where they're going to, get to go on those trips, get to receive the extra beer, shirts, additional educational opportunities, for sure. And Sofia?
I mean, that was an awesome list. I think you guys about covered it. I guess the only thing that I would add is I like the idea of rituals that people kind of have to look forward to, like what Kelly said about birthdays, but you kind of make your own depending on what your culture is like. Kind of, I think celebrating anniversaries is really awesome. Having like gifts that you get for every anniversary, things that people can kind of look forward to that are expected and consistent.
And I think this panel, the past hour, has been a pretty good representation of the current state of the industry. We can try to cram as much as we want into an hour, but we still have so much we can learn. And I know the initial description had a lot more we were going to discuss, but Max, I think we stuck to the title of creating the best team possible. We talked about where you start, how you get there, and how you work, maintain, and motivate. So we touched on a ton of really important concepts today. And Nick, I told myself I wouldn't say it anymore, but passion. I absolutely love how passionate you are. And passion is contagious. It starts off the top, it goes through your entire team, and it radiates with your guests. And that is truly how you create a successful business, whether brewery or in some other line of work. That's how you get people who are passionate about sharing your brand. So I appreciate the four of you joining us today. This has been a really great conversation. I think we might need to do a follow-up where we dive into some more deeper issues, how to create that best possible team. But more importantly, thanks everyone else who joined us at some point for this conference. It's been a really fun 3 days. I know I've enjoyed my time at the computer, and I'm looking forward to 3 more days of diving back into rewatching all the content. Huge thanks to Precision Fermentation, River Drive Cooperage, and White Labs, industry partners who are passionate about educational opportunities like this. And as always, CBP is 100% free. I know Max wants to pay for you to go get your Cicerone and, go to Siebel's to learn how to brew a little bit better, and I hope they do. But, we're here as a free resource to anyone in the industry. But once again, Max, Nick, Kelly, and Sofia, man, I've absolutely loved this conversation with the 4 of you today. Looking forward to those beers in person. And thanks again for sharing your wisdom today. And everybody, see you later. Have a great evening or wherever you are in the world.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.